Probably the most under restoration mode cathedral that I've ever been in. You probably noticed the reflection of the same degree of restoration scaffolding and infrastructure from my videos in the inside. Not terribly impressively looking artistically, The smaller churches of greater interest to me. It's the statue of Archbishop, and he is famous because during the occupation by the Nazis, he resisted them, and they threatened to put him in front of a firing squad, and his response was, "You should hang me," in good Greek Orthodox tradition. This statue was erected, ironically, by the Jews to thank him for his protection and support of them after the Nazi occupation, when Moskinos became the prime minister for a while of Greece. This is how he holds his right hand fingers. That is symbolic of 4 letters of something. Those letters are ICXC, which is short in Greek for Jesus Christ. I'm going to look at this small church without the benefit of Rick's guide, mainly because, like most guides, that one distracts me from what I want to see when I'm here. I can read about that before, and I can listen to his guide afterward, but now I want my impressions of what I see. So, I walked around the church earlier. What was impressive to me, or was interesting to me, is all of the relief iconography. And so we'll look kind of closely at that, starting with this area of the church. I'm going to look at that little panel just above those 2 arched or horseshoe windows. Very Byzantium, I think, in the sense that the intense use, as the Islamic does also, of symbology versus necessarily plants and humans, although I think they do mix it in Byzantine art. In fact, if this is an example, it illustrates that those like dragons or lions or something along that line. But you'll see also the dominance of just graphics. They may be rosettes of flowers. I'm looking at the door, main entrance to this little chapel, and I'm sure those symbols have some very significant meaning. I think the 3rd from the left and the 3rd from the right, or 4th from the right, represent the Byzantium cross of Orthodox Christianity, and yet the one in the center seems to have the elongated bottom of the Roman Christian cross. I'm sure someone who's a reasonable scholar knows what those things are. And we'll take a closer look at these. Notice that long frieze-like panel I'll look at in just a few moments. We'll look in detail at these just for the fun of it. You wonder when you look at panels like this that are so discreet, were they put here like different subject paintings, or were they panels taken from someplace else? This one's particularly interesting, isn't it? Looks like winged lions. But an old American man approached me, filled with anger about how this church is composed of relics or material from other churches, and that America doesn't do anything to stop the kind of sacrilege. And after I realized he was just bent on being an angry old man, I just told him I didn't have time to waste on his anger. This seemed to imply or give some credence perhaps to what we were thinking, and that is that buildings like this are rebuilds from material that was found and scabbed into these old monasteries or old churches. The irony is, given the fact that civilizations who conquer seem to want to destroy the nation they've conquered, except in the instance of, for example, the Romans and the Greeks. Such rebuilds like this, incorporating past structure elements, is the only way we're actually going to be able to preserve for the future what was in the past. And that old man illustrates my feelings towards those Americans and others who go and fight with ISIS. Don't ever come back. You're so stupid that you can be taken in as an American or a Brit or a Frenchman by the vitriolic commentary of ISIS and other radical Islamic groups, assuming that there's a distinction between radical and all of Islamics, or most of them. And as far as I'm concerned, you get what you bought. And you cannot be allowed in this country again, our country, the United States. This with my brother. If parents want to see their kids again, go visit ISIS. I'm sure they'll welcome you. And your head. Reliefs and their placement here do remind me of how a person might decorate a room with different pictures. I mean, there's a dramatic relief. Yet I'll bet you many tourists never even come back here and see it. And then you wonder what this block up here was. See text at the right of some sort? Were those little squares perhaps panels that had some kind of mini carving on them? And notice here, there's a hole, and that hole goes through the other side where there's a duplicate hole, perhaps to hang something from it. This is the easiest way to get that along that route. Precarious as it is, I don't understand. It could come off there any moment. To the far right side, as we were facing the little church, notice all of the panels. Very interesting. It'd be fun to know, if I had the time in life to do it, find out what all this stuff means. That looks like an eagle with a sheep. I bet there's more to that story. Look at that little pediment inside of its own little frame. How interesting is that? Get in closely on this one, see what it actually is. Some kind of four-footed animal at the bottom there. Can't be sure what it's doing though. It's some kind of a elk or deer. There's the cathedral. We're now going to start down the street, Halo Cathedral or something like that. But what typifies this area is shops selling all of the iconography of the Christian Orthodox Church, as well as clothing, accessories, etc., that the priests would wear. So we quite likely will see some of these priests. There are also workshops where the creation of them occurs. You wonder if there were shops like this 3, 4, 5 centuries ago that the major churches I've been in purchased their paraphernalia from. It is interesting to look at the detail here. Now these look like they have, how can I say it, mix and match pre-cut pieces that you could use to assemble the kind of thing you wanted. Notice how they look like thin sheets of metal, as opposed to what we've seen in a lot of the churches in Spain that were the true thick cast, or however, silver and gold. Can't refute the apparent detail and massive work in creating these devices. How there can be so many churches that could buy this, or do they replace them over time, or just keep adding them like street signs in a city? Opt for the garb, if you will. I assume the Catholics throughout Europe and America have the same, and then bulk material so you can design your own. I wonder if in the old days there were shops that looked just like this. Large bolts of cloth, as well as the trim that went on whatever garments were made. Never quite thought about it. Think of things like this as one-offs. There's a mall, a little mall that apparently has the same. Isn't this a pretty kind of a tile work? The name of the street. Something. Oh, I think it's a bookbinder. Yeah. Well, it just occurred to me that these choices may represent vanity amongst the priesthood. We're at Flessa and Adrianou, and we've just walked up from behind me, behind my right shoulder, behind the camera, on Adrianou. I guess we continue on further. Ermou Street, which is probably best described as the prime tourist souvenir street, where you can buy anything that would appeal to the tourists, from probably the reasonably expensive and maybe even authentic to just the trashy stuff. Wise enough to go to the central market where you can buy this stuff in bulk. I wandered down here the other day when I was looking for the Temple of Zeus. Personifies the classic tourist who buys crap as though that crap somehow personified the trip. And it's just junk, and it represents that they didn't go to look for the authentic. Here's a little side street that has probably somewhat authentic older homes, maybe 20th century, 19th century stuff. The one down there restored a bit and maintained, this one here not. Doesn't even look like it's lived in, so may well be abandoned. Interesting story probably behind it. Pretty church on this tourist street, and maybe Rick's got some comments about it. But next to it, or just before you enter it really, are older Greek ruins of something. Maybe there's some explanation somewhere, but with columns still standing, that's pretty novel. Let's walk around the fence there and see more. And more tucked underneath that small street. That's one of the lovely things about an old city like this in Rome, is the unexpected ruins. Both those they've discovered and the ones they'll discover when they try to build and construct and excavate. is one example why we don't see whole ruins that are intact often, is because successive generations blast their infrastructure through it. Seeing how this wall seems to lure us, if you will, deeper into the subsurface. And you wonder if this height from where I'm sitting in the temple once was grade to the area above, which is now grade, whether it was filled in with this rock or this rock was used as support to protect the ruins as well as support the street above it. See the difference of the grade here, probably 20-25 feet. This is a Lysicrates monument, whose footage I encountered that closely when I had just left the theater of Dionysus and was looking for the temple of Zeus. The street that I walked on was called the path of tripods because it held, next to these monuments or statues were tripods that held various trophies that were won by the people and or awarded in that theater of Dionysus. But underneath this red sand are other monuments like this that have been discovered but reburied or kept in their buried position and covered with the sand to await later archaeological analysis, blah, blah, blah. And you'll notice that we are quite close to the Acropolis. There's the Greek flag hanging from that viewpoint. These narrow streets remind me of Manhattan Beach and Hermosa Beach in the old days. It's interesting, maybe a postal box. You can also see the ruins or the buildings that have never been completed everywhere. It'd be rather picturesque if it were neat and clean and painted up a bit. We'll follow the signs to the Acropolis, Steve says. One of the problems you'd have here is you couldn't park anywhere. So you have to be reconciled to a life of carrying everything in and out places. I think if you had internet service and a manservant to run everything about, it'd be kind of fun to live here. Hello, Cat. How are you doing? How are you? Hi. Excuse me. Thank you. Thank you. I have a spiral staircase that winds up a little bit higher. Door, pretty door, and fitting may belie the elegance of the interior. Resting all the whitewashed shapes that we see. How pretty this would be if it were sunny. And a nice balcony. This is that pretty house. There's a balcony up above also. Little deck, isn't it? I think it'd be fun to vacation here, I suspect. Maybe a very fine residence. With several little decks. Isn't that cool? If you had internet access here and a reason to be here, like you were writing a book or studying Greek something or other, too cool, eh? You could almost feel Socrates' vibrations from somewhere. Down in that house we just looked at, again you can see how well each of these little spaces is so nicely revitalized or maintained. Yeah, I was wrong. I'm not sure if this is a residence or a church. I think it may be a church. So much for my good thinking. Converted into my house. And then I will have done two good things. Cynic. It's not necessarily a beautifully inspiring view from up here. Unless you like to look over a big sprawling city. Here behind this fence on the approaching the sheer walls of the Acropolis. It's a very pretty green area. A more interesting dome than we've seen. I'm not quite sure what I think so. It just visually strikes me that way. And this little church. These elevator to the Acropolis. This is the Metamorphsis church, and this is the clepsydra staircase that we're going to take down right here. Looks like some interesting side streets, particularly if you lived here. Apparently it'll get narrower and narrower, which is fun. No end to the graffiti and creativity. Notice here how this strange otherworld inverted root system goes onto the wall behind this facing wall. Babylon. Some of it appears to be just a way of identifying yourself with your initials. Some have spent some considerable effort to do what they feel is a creative job. Others just, either for destructive purposes or negative responses, just throw their junk onto the wall. And then some get organized. This one was in English, so I'm guessing it's a European, Western European, who speaks English, maybe, I don't know what, but they used a stencil in black paint. They have no creativity except they think their wording is so clever. Imagine how lovely that rooftop can be on occasion, and probably what a very elegant home furnished inside. Pretty little simple building. And the smell of some kind of cooking meat smells delicious, wafting up on the wind, which is extensive and sometimes wild today. See, these are thoughtful. One has to wonder what was in the mind of the person. Noticing how most over beyond that doorway. Orange trees and lemon trees, fruit trees in general, add a lovely ambience. What annoys me and probably the owners of these homes is why they have the gall to destroy what someone's worked hard to make that. It seems too vaguely done to project much of a thought, and yet there's some Greek verbiage below that may redeem it. So we're overlooking the Roman Forum, or the Roman Agora. But I'm going to wait until it's a prettier day and come back and enjoy this rather than suffer through this chilliness I feel here. And that, I think, may be the only Islamic hammam, or baths, if you will, in Athens. Just working my way back on the back streets from near the road that takes you up to the Acropolis, where I had dinner just now and have had dinner before at an Indian restaurant. Just found this to be an interesting street. Probably be a lot more fun when the weather's nice. And that way are a whole bunch of shops with authentic old stuff in it that would be magnificent for decorating an apartment. And it ties right into here, Montserrat Square, back to my hostel, so it all keeps tying together. Here's some graffiti that looks like it might have actually been planned for this building. A modern designed building at this state, or at least its remodel is. Probably a lovely apartment upstairs. And here a bit of graffiti that's appropriate next to those posters for musicians in this area.